I'd like to introduce our guest, Laura Heller. Laura is Director of Editorial Content and Communications for Publicis Health Media and a fellow Forbes contributor. Laura, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Anne. It's always fun to catch up.
So, Laura, just for the audience to understand, Laura is really who Chris and I attribute to us even being able to do the things that we do today. Laura and Chris reached out and were able to get connected early on as we left Target, and I think Laura holds a very special spot in our hearts here at OmniTalk and with all the work that we're doing. So Laura, it's especially wonderful to be able to have you on this podcast because you're certainly a woman in retail that I've looked up to and who's really been a mentor for both Chris and I. So thanks again for taking the time with us today. I'm so excited to share your story with the rest of the Women's Retail Collective audience.
It's unusual to be the person who has a story because as a lifelong editor, right? I tell other people's stories.
Right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Well,
I'm not always comfortable talking about myself, but I'll give it a go.
Well, I'm sure we can take this step by step. It'll be easy. Let's start at the beginning. I want to hear kind of. I know you grew up in Chicago. Tell us a little bit about kind of what you did in school and kind of how you started this career that you have today.
Oh, sure. Gosh, yes. Once upon a time, I went to Chicago Public School. I'm from the North Side, Rogers Park, really. And I went to the University of Iowa to be a writer. They have the Iowa Writers Workshop there and a really great journalism school. And it just turns out that I was much better at telling other people's stories than I was at making them up wholesale. So I went into journalism, wanted to stay in the Midwest, and the opportunities were in B2B publishing. So I started in the retail space in 1995. So yeah, I'm that old. And my first job was for a grocery publication that went to the grocery industry.
So Laura, how did you get into retail? There's a lot of B2B options that you could be covering as a writer and reporter. Why retail?
It was the opportunity that presented itself. Honestly,
okay.
The first editorial gig I had was for a magazine called Chemical Processing.
Ooh, sexy.
Very sexy. And the cover shot of every publication was like the mills in Northwest Indiana all lit up at night.
Oh, nice.
Very glamorous. And yeah, but I learned a lot. I was only there for 6 months, but I started to figure out what was needed in the industry. And then when a job opened at Grocery Headquarters or Grocery Marketing Magazine, I think it was at the time, I took it and it was so much fun. I mean, because at this, yes, you learn an industry very deeply, but you're also a consumer. So everything that you're doing business-wise really touches you personally. So that was a really good entry for me to business publishing and business.
And so with that, I mean, where were you drawing inspiration for stories? Was it being in the grocery store and you'd think of something, or like, how do you just kind of get connected into that world?
So it's interesting to think back on that because it was pre-internet, right? I think we had one AOL account for the entire office and we had to share a login and it was dial-up.
Oh my gosh.
So how you did it by good old-fashioned reporting. I went to a lot of trade shows. I think the very first one I ever went to was called Dairy Deli Bake, and it was in Minneapolis.
Ooh, again, this industry just keeps getting hotter and hotter. It's can't beat it.
It's for the fact that it's the largest driver of the economy, right? It is a very intimate world, right? You and I know that. We see the same people. We go to conferences. It feels very like home, right? When you show up and you're in Las Vegas and there's 10,000 people at what is considered one of the smaller shows that we have. And many of the faces, right? And you shop and people change jobs, but they don't go out of the industry, right? You get to keep your skill set, your contacts, your knowledge, and grow within the industry, maybe different roles, maybe different companies, but we seem to, many of us rarely jump out of it. And that's what I've tried to do is I've moved through my career, because you don't want to let go of the people you've met and the things you've learned.
What have you seen over the course of, you started in covering grocery. I know you worked in electronics, covering the electronics industry for a long time. If you look back at that, Laura, what are some of the changes or things that stand out to you as you kind of start with your first job out of college, and you look at where the retail landscape is now? Are there things that have happened that you think like, man, these were really big, major turning points in the industry?
Yeah, sure. I did. When I went to work for Discount Store News, which became Retailing Today. That was a really big jump for me, because it was not just covering the grocery sector, which felt very intimate. And I was assigned a beat of consumer electronics retailers, the product category, and also Midwest-based mass merchants. And at the time, there were a lot more smaller regional players, right? In the Midwest, especially. There was Shopko and Pomida and Duckwall Alco, if anybody remembers that one. And Target wasn't as big, but it was powerful. And there were a lot more department stores in the regional world. Many of them became consolidated under Macy's, right? That was before all of that happened. So watching the consolidation go on, and also Sears, right? So Sears is in my backyard in Chicago. Very, very strong at the time in 1997. But you could start to see where things were going off the rails, right? And so is somebody those of us inside the industry who've been here a long time have watched that, right? And listened to the executives all along the way say, oh no, we think we have the right plan. We think we have, the winning formula here. We think we are so strong that it doesn't matter, because we are, the leader in our space. And then you every time you hear that as a reporter, you cringe, because you've heard it from all the failed ones that came before, right? That's the standard line along the way to the end.
Right.
So that's happened. And then the category killers in consumer electronics, I mean, that was a really strong space, right? When I started covering Best Buy, they had hit a bump and had an inventory issue over the holidays that nearly put them out of business. And so I started covering them, and their stocks like down in the single digits, I think. And people are not expecting them to survive. Circuit City's super strong. They were the challenger brand. We still had Radio Shack, which was really powerful, and CompUSA and the computer superstores, and Fry's Electronics, and all of those things were really growing as the personal computing space was coming online, even before cell phones existed. And so the people thought Best Buy wouldn't exist, and boy, did they show them. And so that was extremely exciting to cover that from the inside, get to know those executives along the way, hear their stories, watch the trajectory go up and down, and then see some of their competitors fall off singing that same song of, oh no, we think we have the right formula here. We're just going to stick to our knitting.
Right. Have there been any companies, Laura, that you feel like really were able to accomplish that, who did have the right formula? Are there any ones that stand out to you?
I think Best Buy does. I think it's proven to be exceptionally resilient. And I think that part of that is because of the humility that they had to get in touch with. They exhibit a humility that is unique in successful businesses. The hubris is what kills you in business, I think. That's my personal opinion. That we know best is a real stake through the heart. And any business leader who can say, hey, wait a minute, we made a mistake here. We are trying to fix it, and we're working on the formula to fix it, but we don't think we have all the answers at this moment. And I think that maybe that's not the best message for Wall Street, right? But it is maybe the right message for your business's health. And those two don't always dovetail. So yeah, that's my pick on that. And Target, I mean, there's something about Minneapolis, Anne.
What can I say? We're of good stock. Tell me what it's like to have been or to be really a woman in this industry.
It's been a real evolution, to be honest. When I started covering grocery in 97, It was very much a still a boys network here. I feel like, you know, especially like that very first Dairy Deli Bake Show in Minneapolis. I was young and it was my first out of the office adventure, right? And I was walking around with a fellow reporter from another publication, also of the same age. And she and I, you know, it was a million samples, right? It's bakery.
Right.
And you can only taste so many things and some, and I don't know if this will make it on air, but some, you know, one of the sales reps at one of the booths said, "Oh, taste this brownie, taste this brownie." We're like, "I had enough brownies. Thank you very much. Can't have another brownie bite." And he says, "Oh, come on, it's the best." And so she and I each picked one up just to placate him. And he said, "It'll be the second best thing you've ever put in your mouth."
Oh my God. Are you
Right?
serious?
Serious.
Oh my
Now, flash forward from that very first experience in that industry to today, there's a world of difference. We
How
would not
so?
do it.
How
And I
so,
hope that
Laura?
that dinosaur has since retired and sat on the sidelines. But it really sort of, to me, I tell that story, it really illustrates where we've come and where we were. Particularly in grocery was very old school, right? It's a very old business. And then I would also cover electronics and technology. And while we hear a lot about the iniquities in that industry, and they are true, it is also a place where there is a lot more youthful energy, a lot of new blood, and a lot of more open minds, less set in their ways. And so that was a refreshing balance for me to be able to do both. So I would go to CES, and yeah, there were booth babes, and yes, the adult video show was going on at the same time, and you had all of those old boys doing that. But at the same time, it was a different it was a different balance, and it was a different way of looking at women in their own industry. So, and I've watched that change over time as well. And the booth babes went away, and the AVN is now on its own, and you know we don't mix those two. There's still no lines at the women's room at CES, and there's always a long line at the men's. But it's got, I take pictures every year and I can compare them, and I say, okay, well, no, it's a little different. It's a little more balanced. Not
As you are kind of thinking about the rest of your career and where it's gone, I know at one point you spent some time as the editor for Retail Dive, which is a major publication, I think, for our industry. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to that position and kind of how things have kind of adapted since you were there?
yeah, I was really excited to join Retail Dive, and I had a good run, a great time there. They are a young and still growing publishing company in the B2B space. And so they publish a slew of publications across many different industries. And when I joined, they were looking to sort of accelerate some of the things they were doing. They wanted to be able to have speakers on panels and a different kind of a presence in the industry. They have a really great history of recruiting sort of the best and brightest journalists, like some of them straight from journalism school. It's a very young editorial team, very ambitious, very, very skilled and capable. And so what they wanted was they wanted to add somebody and some people across any of their publications that were a little bit more established in these industries. And so that's when I joined, and that's when I think you and I met. And as such, you know, you mentioned in my intro how I met you guys, and Chris in particular, was I got an anonymous tip from somebody at Target saying, "Hey, you should really read this guy's stuff. He just put this out on a blog." You know, like Chris was just like, he had a lot of thoughts and he needed them to get out there somewhere. So I read this blog post and I got in touch, and I was like, it's very funny, very astute. We published contributed content. Would you like to publish for us? And so that was the beginning of that relationship. So that was fun, and I was able to do a lot of really good things with Retail Dive. It's a grueling business, and that's part. I left not because of anything other than the fact that working on an Eastern time zone deadline every morning, and from the Midwest, you know, was sort of like you're always on, right? You're always
Right.
always on. You're up at 6. You're making sure your news feeds current. You're making sure that all of your stories have been assigned. You're not missing anything. You're working with a team of editors remotely. You're putting that, you know, you're publishing 10 stories a morning,
Right.
hitting send by 10:30, 11 o'clock. And getting a cup of coffee and then repeating it. So
Right.
that's hard. People don't quite understand the pressures of a journalist.
Yes. And on top of that, trying to find new content too. I mean, tell us a little bit about your process there too, Laura. Like what are you doing to stay curious and to find things that inspire you to write or for you to have your team be writing?
You have to be able to let your editor, your staff identify their own key areas of interest, right? So we had one person who really liked quirky personal profiles, and
Okay.
he went on to write a couple which have won some nice awards. Um, if you have a chance, you want to really dig in during our quarantine here. There's a couple stories by Ben Unglesby and Retail Dive that I think are worth curling up by the fire with, not the least of which is this one on finding the real Jay Peterman from the
Oh
Seinfeld
God,
show.
yeah. Right.
He is a real retailer, and he exists, by the way,
Oh
and
my
he's still in
gosh.
business.
I will be
So
looking that up.
yeah, I mean, put Ben on a plane. There he went off. He wanted to drink bourbon with Jay Peterman, and I think he got close to the bourbon part, but maybe not quite. But it's won a couple of awards. So yeah, that part was fun. So you have to like let your staff find their mean, where they want to dig in. And then in terms of for me staying current, staying on top of things like by going to conferences, catching up with everybody such as yourself and Chris, and making sure that I participate in conversations and social media, and that's where I get the things that you share and our colleagues share that I hadn't been aware of. It's a constant, I mean, it's a lot. We all know our social media is overwhelming sometimes, but it is also a really wonderful way to stay current, learn new things. I try to make sure that I follow paths and not stay inside of a closed loop, because otherwise you don't get anything new.
And follow paths into new types of careers. I want to talk about what you're doing right now, talking about staying curious and on the cutting edge of where this retail industry is going. You recently took this job with Publicis Health Media. Tell
Yes.
us a little bit about that, Laura, and what interested you in the job, and what you think this kind of path might look like in the next couple months as you take this new role on.
Well, I joined Publicis with a different agency about almost 2 years ago.
Right.
And that was part of the, like, oh, I'm burnt out on journalism, the daily grind. Let's see, I've 20 something years of experience and knowledge um, and contacts in the commerce space, right? And these are all their clients. So maybe there's a way to adapt to that world. And I did. I was with Performix for about a year and a half, and then I've moved over to Publicis Health Media. And when I started, my boss likes to send out an introductory email, and she says, she asked me, she says, why did you choose health, right? Because it seems a little bit far outside of my loop.
Right.
And I was like, that's easy. After 20 plus years of trying to explain how people can sell more stuff, I would like to help people live better lives a little bit, and I get the opportunity to do this, but yet still have one or two fingers on the pulse of the retail world, because retailers play a very, very large role in health and media. And in particular at the moment, we're seeing the rise of that, right? With, Walmart and Target and CVS and Walgreens stepping up to really help with testing for the coronavirus, and to really help, if not create a solution, help to participate in the solution. And I think that we're going to see a lot in the future ways that consumers are going to be re-embracing or embracing the retailers they go to for their everyday needs in different medical ways. And so I'm interested in that. It's a new way to explore something that I've already been deeply involved with.
Yeah. Is there anything yet, Laura, in this career that you've had, going all the way back to the early days of the grocery publication and chemical processing plant publication that you were working on? As you think about your career, is there anything that you still haven't done yet that you feel like it's on the career bucket list for me, that you can share with us?
Hi. Um, That's a hard one. It's not like you know, it's not like it's not like I've achieved everything, right? But I am hopeful that I can do a little bit more on the for good side of the equation here. The things, you know, that we do inside the industry, and we talk about, you know, who's going to be successful and what products will hit and what trends are. That's all
Right.
fun, right? But to see sort of an impact on the population in terms of making healthcare more affordable, creating solutions that are more accessible, making impactful change that will carry down the road. That's something I would like to do. It's a big picture, right? But I'm happy to be with an organization right now that is trying to do that in many ways. Yes, it's an agency. Yes, you know, the clients are who they are, and you know, we represent pharma, and but there's an opportunity to also to represent them in the right way and in a good way, and to help with campaigns that resonate. And so that's where I am with that.
Well, I
Um,
would say that you've definitely impacted some lives. One thing we didn't talk about is you were an adjunct professor at Columbia in Chicago, teaching a lot of people how to do what you've done so successfully for these past few years. Um, I'm curious, Laura. I'm sure one, I wish that I could have been a student in your class. What a fun class that would have been. My journalism school teachers were not quite as exciting and fun, and I certainly I don't know that I'd be meeting any of them for a drink post conference in Vegas. But tell me a little bit about those students, and as you think about what you'd send them off with into the world, what was some of the advice that you would give them about this type of career and covering this industry?
oh, I did that for 11 years, and I taught a few different courses as an adjunct at Columbia College Chicago in the journalism school there. But the one that was my core class was business to business magazine publishing. So
Right.
really specific, right? My sweet spot. Um, and it was required for our students to graduate from the magazine program. And it was not anybody's favorite class going into it, but I was always happy to hear the reviews on the way out, which was, we were dreading this, but we really loved it. It's one of our favorite classes at Columbia. And the most useful. Like one of my students once said, I feel like all my other classes teach me how journalism works, but I think that this one also teaches me how life works.
Wow,
And,
Laura, that's pretty
and
impressive.
well, thank you. But I know, I mean, because now we're right, I made them all pick an industry to cover for a semester. And so they had to learn about how, you know, retail works, although I had made them, retail was off the table for that one. Uh, because I'm like, you know, Walmart's not going to call you back. Like that's the trouble with sources, right? You have to be
Right.
able to start somewhere where they're going to say, oh, student journalists. So there was a lot of, you know, covering the coffee industry. They all wanted to be music, or, you know, because they're young and idealistic. So they had some lists, but the best was like, you know, I'm like, cover dry cleaning, right? There's a dry cleaner on every
Yeah.
block in the city, and you know, they're all independently owned, and they're all going to talk to you, and there's a lot of moving parts inside. They need things like chemical supplies and packaging and POS systems and all of the things that go into that. And so anyway, I'm off in the weeds on this, but that was a lot of fun for me, and it was a lot of fun for them. And so they got to learn how business works, which is life, right?
Right.
And talk to people in business and cold call these people, and it wasn't celebrity driven. You know, it wasn't about fashion, which is the things that, you know, and you know, a lot of these kids, they want to go on to write for the New York Times or the Atlantic or Vanity Fair, and that's very ambitious, and some do. And then some of the best and brightest went on to write for B2B publishing companies. So I was very excited about that. And they get in touch and they say, you know, I just heard from one who said, I used something I learned in your class nearly every day.
Yeah.
And that's really cool.
Well, as a former journalism student, you think that you're going to be doing all this hard-hitting investigative reporting, and this is going to be, you're in it for the cause. And I think what's really cool is that there is that element that you're talking about. You do have to figure out how you're going to pay the bills, and how you're going to earn your keep in this industry. And you did a really great job of teaching them that. And I think not just teaching them that, but also showing them that you made your way through the ranks, and now what's really cool is that you are taking this, you've taken this new position where you're showing us all, what a career in retail still could evolve to. It's not, you're not like pigeonholed to these certain industries or to these certain careers or particular trades. You're now in an area which probably didn't exist, even a few months ago, this media and health and retail kind of mashup. So I think that's really commendable, and it's showing that you are, staying on top of it, staying curious, and it sounds like that's advice that you'd give to those students too.
Yeah, I try, and I think that that they get a lot. I was stunned by how much feedback they get from other people within the college. About how hard. Yes, journalism is a difficult field. Yes, it's contracting. Yes, there's layoffs all the time. Publishing has gone digital, and that's impacted revenue streams, and a lot. The number of working journalists today is much reduced from when I started or you started or even when they started freshman year to senior year. So they're very anxious about all of that. And, this shows them a path where they can work in publishing and in journalism and not starve, right?
Right.
You don't need to have 3 jobs. Maybe you can just have 1 or 2,
Right.
But that was a big relief to them because there were days I'd come into class and there'd be like all long faces around the table. Like, what in the world? Like, oh, we just got a big lecture from so-and-so about how, the Tribune just laid off a bunch more people and we should really reconsider our majors. I'm like, are you serious? This is what your college is telling you? I'm like, I just bought a new car and it's a nice one and we're all good,
Right.
Well,
Right.
don't worry so much. Work hard, be good at what you do, find your niche, and run with it. So,
Laura, if you, as you look back on this career that you've had, if you could go back and write somebody a thank you note who impacted your career, anyone, doesn't have to be somebody that you worked with specifically, but if, as you look at that, who would you thank for the position that you're in today, and what would you say to them?
oh, wow. I still am in touch with one of these people, so I do say it to them. My editors from Discount Store News really made a big impact. They taught me how to be a good reporter and be a good member of the industry and participate in a way that makes sense for a journalist without getting too chummy, and how to be a leader. So I think that Tony Lasante and Jennifer Negley, who were the leaders, the editors at Discount Store News when I joined, are really critical in that. And I, to this day, stay in touch with Tony in particular. I always, whenever I want to take a different job or find a new path, I ask his advice. So
you're hanging on to those mentors. We should
oh
find some.
yeah, yeah, and for some of my students, I find that they still reach out once in a while. So that's wonderful.
Well, I certainly reach out to you, and I am curious if people were moved by this, or they want to talk to you or meet you at a trade show or conference coming up. What's the best way for people to follow what you're doing, Laura?
I think to connect on LinkedIn and Twitter is probably one of the best venues. I used to give out an email, but I find that direct messages or direct tweets seem to resonate a little bit more today. They rise above a lot of the noise of the inbox.
Right.
So, and I want to learn what they're doing. So connecting with them is also a good way for me to broaden my worldview.
Well, find Laura Heller on LinkedIn, or what's your Twitter handle, Laura?
At LF as in Frank Heller. My middle name is Faith.
Thank you, Laura, so much for taking the time to do this. I will certainly be continuing to follow where you're going. I'm really excited for what we're going to see from you in this new position. And again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Ann.
All right. Okay, if you could have your own concert and you can choose 3 bands, dead or alive, for that concert, who are you choosing?
I feel like we did have this conversation. For sure, Nick Cave, The Bad Seeds. Number 1. The Violent Femmes, because they're just so much fun.
I love it. That's so
And
great. I love this question because it's like for one, it gives me a new Spotify channel to turn on because it's like you get reminded of these bands that people are fans of. It's like, oh yeah, they were amazing. Okay.
Poor Dog Pondering, also fun.